Welcome to Off Panel.
Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the owner of two San Francisco comic book shops, Comics Experience and Comics Experience Outpost, as well as the columnist behind Tilting at Windmills at Comics Beat. It's Brian Hibbs. Thanks for coming on, Brian.
Thank you for having me, David.
So, Brian, we're going to go to a lot of places. I'm sure listeners expect us to, but I wanted to ask about how things are going for your shops. You own two shops, your original Comics Experience shop, which for listeners who had listened to our previous podcast, probably know it's a book-centric shop, lots of trades, lots of graphic novels, and its sister shop, Comics Experience Outpost, which is much more periodical heavy. Last year, they both had good years before a drop-off in the fourth quarter. How's 2017 been?
2017 has been a little rougher. In the main store, we saw a pretty big drop that happened almost immediately after the election. I don't know if this is a San Francisco thing or what, but I think that a lot of the drop off at the big store is people just being worried about where the economy might be heading and what might be going on with the current occupant of the White House.
Mm-hmm.
The periodical store was doing considerably better, but we're way down right now year over year because a year ago was
Rebirth.
Exactly. Rebirth was ginormous, and there was essentially no way to hit those same numbers again. Particularly since Marvel's not doing much right now, and DC has kind of hit that plateau. So
yeah. Well, I know that last year, Outpost grew by nearly 12%. I think it was like 11.6%, even with the downturn. And you've owned that shop for 3 years. So do you think that was primarily like Rebirth, or had it been kind of growing in that kind of level for the last few years?
No, it's been growing, but the growth has largely been with business from DC and smaller publishers, and a pretty large drop from Marvel. That store has historically been a Marvel store. Even more specifically, that store has been a Spider-Man store since before I took it over. The previous owner had the biggest hard-on for Spider-Man in the world. So there's been a pretty precipitous drop in Marvel sales, which were made up and more with DC sales post Rebirth.
Yeah.
I don't think if it wasn't for Rebirth, though, clearly we wouldn't have had that growth. That was what got people back into DCs over there.
Mm-hmm.
So
I know when we talked for my Spider-Man article that you said that used to be Amazing Spider-Man used to be number one with a bullet at Outpost. That was, it was just the nature of the shop. Like he has a statue there, all that stuff like that. And you told me then it was, I think you said it was like a top 20 book, but it wasn't a top number one book anymore. Is it mostly like DC at the top of the list there, or is it been kind of?
Yeah, no, it's Batman is the number one book over there now, and most of the top 20 are DC books. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm kind of curious about, like, you said that Marvel's downturn is something that's having an impact on your shops. What kind of impact is that having kind of on your customer base, and like in a sense like an area of effect on other books? Like, do you find that other books are getting dropped because people are dropping their Marvel books, perhaps?
I don't know that I've necessarily seen that. I don't know that I've really done that much analysis, particularly to that, though. Because that's really getting into the weeds. And to a certain extent, as a store, that kind of stuff. It's not that it doesn't matter, but you don't put a tremendous amount of effort, because what could you do about it?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, even if I found out that was the case, what on earth could I possibly do about it?
You can't make Marvel's books better. You can't make them like Marvel's comics.
Right, exactly. So there's not a lot. Most retailers, I think, tend to focus on cause and effect stuff where they can actually do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I've actually had the conversation recently with several retailers who've said that, when their Marvel fans are unhappy with it, they'll just throw the baby out with the bathwater, and it's like kind of impacting like some of the smaller books where they used to be the ones who would buy a lot of Marvel and the Marvel zombies, and then they would buy like Saga, or they would buy like maybe let's say Extremity, the Skybound book, or they buy Kaiju Max or something like that. And now those books are getting left behind because they're not buying Marvel. I guess that's the main reason why, because I heard other people reference that.
Well, I mean, for me, and again, this may be something about the economy in San Francisco or whatever. The thing that I'm seeing is just people don't have money in general right now, and so I've got a bunch of customers who are like, I lost a job, a year ago, and I haven't really been able to find replacement work, so I can't do comics anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the kind of thing I tend to hear, rather than I don't like the way the Marvel comics are going, so I'm going to stop buying comics. I just don't see that. Part of it is possibly because our store has always not been, like, from a company point of view, not been one company specific. So I think that it's not like guys who buy 90% Marvel and they get a couple of small press books per se. Like, people get a much wider swath of material overall. Does that make sense?
No, 100%. I also kind of always have gotten the impression about your stores, especially the original comics experience. I kind of feel like because you've been around for as long as you have and you've been a part of it and everything like that, have you found that you kind of have your regulars that kind of stick around and they come and kind of trust the store's taste and things of that sort?
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think that that's actually true for any store that tries to do that.
Right.
You can absolutely influence the things that your customers buy. I mean, you're not going to change their taste, clearly.
Right.
But you can influence what they're willing to try, and just expand their taste if you're always honest with your customers and you're always promoting good quality material.
Mm-hmm. I bet you were one of the only shops in 2016 that had Daniel Clo's Patience as one of their top 10 selling graphic novels and trades. And that was
I would be really surprised if that were true. I would think that would also be true at Chicago Comics. I would think that would also be true.
Isotope.
I mean, there's a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen stores, and the stores that sell the most comics overall, I would think that those stores would also be equally selling that book.
Yeah. No,
honestly.
I guess I was just looking at your list and like, not that, I mean, obviously Daniel Close is a huge name and somebody who's been doing this stuff for forever. And I guess like, I would say you're probably a rarity amongst most direct market stores. I mean, I can imagine like Isotope doing that, or like Mission Comics and Art and things of that sort. Hilariously, all in your area.
You literally also named half the comic stores in San Francisco.
Yeah. The funny thing is that is a complete accident. I wasn't aiming for San Francisco. Those are just like the types of stores that would probably, I feel like, have those.
Yeah.
But,
and here's the thing too, though, is at Outpost, it was not in the top 20. I don't know what it was, but I would have to go look. But I'm sure it wasn't in the top 20.
How much do your book club? How much did the book clubs determine your top sellers? Do you think?
Oh, I don't include the book clubs in the top sellers at all.
I missed it.
Because I think that would be cheating, honestly. Yeah, no, those I mean, so look, I do think that the book club influences the top 20, right? Because obviously we take the book club selection and we put the book club selection on the front counter,
right?
And we chalk it up, yada yada yada. But it's not. I don't put those 250 copies into those lists, because if I did, that would totally skew the list.
That would be the top of the list.
My top 12 books would be the top the books that we picked, through the year. And even Kids Club, which is 150 members, 150 copies is more than we sell, in of most books in a year, like by far, So our top 24 picks would be the adult club and the kids club.
I do have to say I was very happy to see Space Dumplings on the top of the list at Outpost, or like not top, but like top 10. That was nice.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Like, so we talked about this a little bit. It seems like the ebbs and flows kind of hit your shops a little bit less because you kind of have regulars. But do you feel like at the original comics experience that because it's built heavily around the book side of things, do you feel like the ebbs and flows of the periodical side have a less pronounced impact on that shop, or do you think they still have kind of splashback because eventually those lead to trades?
No, that would be exactly it. There's absolutely splashback. When the front list is poor, then the back list that is derived from that is poor. And yeah, that is there's nothing you can do about that. And so yeah, it has a huge impact. Even though on a month-to-month basis it kind of doesn't, but over the course of time it does.
Yeah, I do have to say that's one of like the really weird misconceptions about how comics work. Is that you wrote about this with your Nighthawk piece, that the idea that a book that didn't sell is all of a sudden going to sell in trade,
Right.
like Omega Man. I remember, no offense to that book, I mean Tom King and Barney B. Begenda made a pretty good comic there, but at the same time, like that's not going to instantly become Saga when when it becomes a trade.
Well, not instantly though. Though it can have a different lifespan. I mean, it is possible for that to happen. I don't know that I can think of an example off the top of my head, but I know it's happened that a book has gone into trade and done better than the serialization of it. But it's really, really rare. Like so rare that I can't think of a book right now. But actually, Omega Man might be an okay example because I think that we were selling like somewhere between 5 and 8 copies of the comic book, and I'm sure we've sold more than 8 to 10 copies of the trade over the course of the year.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
No, I mean, I definitely think there can be lift. I just don't think that it's like. I think sometimes people act like the trades are going to be this like solve that fixes everything, and it's not. I mean,
No, absolutely not.
if it does happen,
Absolutely not.
if it does happen, it's going to be rare. I mean, like I think the perfect example of a book that did okay to well in single issues that became a sensation in trades is Jeff Smith's Bone. I mean, that book hit Scholastic and it blew up and it sold millions of copies. Sure. But that's the exception to the rule largely. And I don't know.
Yep.
I just think that's a fascinating misconception.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that there's a whole lot of misconceptions out there. I mean, and I keep trying to fight the fight, but there are days I'm just like, I say these things over and over and over again. No, digital is not a thing, and there are still people out there who insist that because of some second or third hand report that happened 5 years ago, Ms. Marvel sells fantastic in digital. I mean, maybe it does. I doubt it very, very highly, though. I'm sure it sells better than other Marvel comics, but if you didn't do the print version and you only did the digital version, Ms. Marvel would get canceled the next day.
Right.
Just like any digital comic. There are not enough people reading digital comics for that to be a thing. I hear this over and over and over and over again from publishers, and nobody wants to face it.
Mm-hmm. I'm always really
consumers, I mean.
Yeah. I'm always really fascinated looking at the comments for Tilting at Windmills and seeing people like debate you. It's always an interesting delight.
That's one word for it. Prim out.
I did want to ask about Rebirth. You said it's kind of plateaued a little bit, but I have to give them credit. I mean, we're over a year in now, and technically no books have been canceled yet. Whether or not some of them should have been is an entirely different discussion. But how well is it holding up relative to your expectations, particularly Outpost as a shop that is largely periodical heavy?
Well, we're down 17% from last year. So, and a big chunk of that there is Marvel's, problems, but a big chunk of that is also that Rebirth has hit, a plateau. At the main store, I mean, I always think, how much over subs are we? And a significant number of the Rebirth books are selling subs +1, subs +2 again, which is not a really great place to be long term. But on the other hand, I mean, there's the meta story, I think, of DC Comics is succeeding in a way that creates excitement for the idea of the line, right? So like the Watchmen stuff, the Oz stuff. The people seem generally interested in this, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that even if individual components of the line are doing mediocre, you know, um, that level of kind of interest in the meta story keeps the brand in a healthier place.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember when like 52 was coming out, and we were at a point where people were breaking down what was on Rip Hunter's chalkboard in his like weird lair, and like
Hmm.
it was like they were breaking down an episode of Lost, and like that's the kind of meta story thing that DC I think has been missing for a while. And I see people like writing articles about like who is Oz, and like how will the Watchmen break in and everything like that, and not just like you know big comic sites desperately filling their content needs, but like other ones like and fans speculating about it on Twitter. And it is kind of interesting and kind of heartening to see DC's meta story revive in that sort of way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that is look, the nature of the periodical comic is not even so much are you buying a periodical comic, right?
Hmm.
It's are you buying into the universe? Do you believe in the universe? It's the universes that make Marvel and DC superhero comics happen.
Hmm.
If that makes any sense. I don't. It's the reason that nobody else has ever been able to succeed with superhero comics, because they think they're about the titles, but they're not about the titles. They're about the universe that it's set in, and the interrelatedness of those universes, and how something that can, just the old example of, Spider-Man swinging through the city and he sees Daredevil swinging over there. Like
Hmm.
that's a thing that people really, 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 really like.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, you should never do anything as a publisher, I think, to diminish that. And I think that's largely been the architect of a lot of the problems that both companies have had over multiple story cycles. Is that they will do things that will diminish the meta universe. Even if that's as simple as putting out too many comics with the word Avengers in it, so that no one can tell which comic matters, which comic is the important one. Um, all these things add up, and they really influence how the readership feels about those books.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I you used the example to me. I mean, this is not precisely related, but when we were talking about from my Spider-Man piece, and you were talking about how you thought that the Miles Morales book suffered because it doesn't have Miles Morales in the name anymore. People don't know
Yep.
like what book is Miles Morales' book. It's like
Yep.
to a certain degree, it's like there's multiple layers to the too many books problem. But one of the problems is when you have so many books, you can't tell what is what. Then you run to like I don't know. I mean, like a person walks in, they buy the wrong book, and then they're like, I don't want to buy this book anymore. I'm out on this, and it creates a negative consumer experience, and it's kind of fascinating. It's like I sometimes wonder what the volume of the book's problem, what the origin is. Like, are they just chasing more and more revenue and hoping for the best, or is there like an actual plan behind it? It's kind of murky.
I'm not sure that they know some months.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that both the companies have gotten kind of so large, and they have so many people, as it were, stirring the broth, that a lot of stuff happens, and one part of the company doesn't necessarily know every detail that's happening at the other part. You
Right.
know, um, and I think sometimes decisions are probably made independently and not realizing how they impact the greater thing. When you're publishing 80 or 90 comics, it's really, 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 really difficult to do them cohesively.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I remember I was talking to a comic creator or a Marvel creator, and they were saying about how like they were trying to have control over this character, so like the character wasn't showing up in other books acting completely differently, and they just couldn't. I mean, it just kept happening where the character was acting completely differently because it was just like I don't know. It's hard to kind of control like such a large beast It,
Yep.
it at a certain size it becomes like unruly. But I do think one of the things that's really fascinating is and you may think this is just coincidence, but I feel like when we talked in January of 2016, DC was in the pits and Marvel was on top. I mean, Marvel's still technically on top, but I mean in like a wounded sense. And it kind of seems like lately they've been kind of alternating. And right now we're at a point where Marvel just seems like they're throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And DC actually kind of has a plan. Two questions. One, do you agree with that sentiment? And two, do you think that there is like some level of a cyclical nature to their relationship? It kind of seems like when one is down, the other one is up. But maybe that's just by nature.
Okay, so the first question is do I think that there's a plan? I guess. I mean, I think it appears that Marvel is throwing stuff at the wall, and it appears that DC has a plan. I don't know, again, how factual that actually is when you come down to any individual book.
Right.
But certainly on the meta narrative, that is how it appears, and that seems to be how customers are responding.
Mm-hmm.
I think Marvel would argue that they've got a giant plan. I mean, that's what Legacy is. I think they would argue that all day and all night that they've got a plan. But is it actually? I don't know. I mean, I think some of the evidence is probably against that. What was the second question?
The second question is cyclical nature. Do you think that there's like a cyclical nature to the two? Like, are they doing a forever dance effectively, where one's on top and the other one's...
I don't. I think there's a cyclical nature of the dance that they're doing with themselves. I don't think that there's necessarily a relationship between one publisher and the other.
Sure.
I think that perhaps more of it, has to do with their ability to attract talent, and that there's only so many people in the world who are actually good at doing comics in let's be kind of mean and say the right way, and so it's not an infinite pool of amazing people who are always able to bring their A game all the time, right? That's not how any creative process works, and so there becomes a dance, but I certainly don't think that it has to be that way.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it has to be that way, but it does tend to work out just because there's a finite number of people.
Absolutely. Before we get on to Legacy, I want to ask a couple questions about DC because we're kind of already on the subject. Their next big deal thing is Metal from Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, as well as the artist-centric Dark Matter books. I have to admit, I mean, I may be a bad comic fan, but I don't understand either of those books in the least. Like, I try to look at them, and they just seem kind of like these murky, like, what exactly am I looking at type things. Are those bringing any...
I don't think you're alone in that at all. I think part of it was the way they rolled out the information. They kind of mixed and matched things without making it clear what was what. I still am not, and I've read, Dark Days the Casting and Dark Days the Forge, and I'm still not really actually sure what Metal actually is.
Right.
It's hard to tell. I think it's just a big crossover that has a weird name.
Right. Yeah.
Like if they had called it Crisis of the Dark Multiverse, then I think we would all understand what it was. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But by calling it Metal, like it also seemed like it was a Batman story, and then all of a sudden it's a DC Universe story.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of a sudden, probably, but that just in terms of how it's been brought to us over the years, I am not clear on exactly what it is, and I suppose we'll find out in a couple of weeks when issue number 1 comes out.
I do think one of the fascinating things about it, though, is the fact that you have was it Darkest Days, the Casting the Forge, you had Metal, you have Dark Matter somehow tangentially related to it, and then you have all those weird evil Batman books, and
right.
And like they all have kind of different names, and I think that's one of the things that causes the problem is that there's like, I don't know, it's hard to tie those together because they literally don't have the same name.
Yeah, and again, I mean, especially if we look at those 7 one-shots, like, is that a series? I mean, what is that? I'm ordering them, and I don't really know what they are or who they're for, or how I should be approaching ordering them. So, I do what every retailer does in that circumstances, and I basically went really, really light on them. Thinking, okay, well, if these turn out to be interesting and good, we'll reorder them. Metal, I'm going all in on because it's
Snyder
Capullo, and I feel like even if it's not clear, we'll figure it out. It'll sell fine, but not on those one shots. And at this moment in time, the Dark Matter books, we haven't been given an option to order them yet, but I have no positive feelings towards those comics at all.
Is Metal at least bringing, do you have pre-orders? Do you have people talking about it? Is there any hubbub in your...
Hubbub, no. Pre-orders are generally pretty light, but they were also incredibly light for, for the casting and the Forge. and we sold Batman numbers on those books, and Batman's our best-selling, periodical comic. So that seems good to me.
Yeah.
But they trickled. It wasn't a first week, big heavy lift boom. It was, oh, I'm reading reviews about these. They sound sort of interesting. Oh, it's week 3. I'll come back. I'll buy it at week 3. I mean, and that's good actually. I mean, I'm always happy if books break out of that, that Wednesday patch, and have some legs. And I'm expecting that Metal's going to be the same way. I mean, I ordered pretty big on Metal, and I don't feel like I'm going to miss that. I don't think I missed the target on that.
Have you seen, did you see pretty good success with the button? I heard a lot of shops did really well with that.
Well, we didn't go nuts on it. I could have, so there's 2 different ways to order, right? And you order for the readers, or you can order for the speculators. It's not or, there's an and in there.
Right.
Well, and or. I try to ignore the speculators as much as I can because I've lived through that before, and I remember what it did last time. And actually, that's a thing that we should probably really talk about, because I think that, both with what DC's doing with their special covers, which is they're offering them a month earlier on the FOC cycle. So I have to order. I've already ordered Metal number 2. Metal number 2's FOC was last week.
Mm-hmm.
Metal number 1 has not arrived yet, and the reason for that is because it's got a foil cover, and DC needs the extra lead time, or so they say, to be able to set their print run properly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bigger bet. Because we don't have the ability to get in that first issue, see how people react, and then change our order accordingly. Legacy is I would argue significantly worse with the way that Marvel's handling it, and so I've been talking to a couple of retailers who are like, I'm going all in on this.
On Metal?
And no, on Legacy.
Oh, okay.
To get the lenticulars, to jump through the hoops, to do that, even though at the same time these guys are going, I hate that Marvel's doing this. This is the wrong way to sell comics. This is not the way you should be doing it. They like the idea of the lenticulars, they just don't like the hoops, right?
Right.
And if Legacy does not perform, if either of these launches does not perform to the hype, a lot of stores that are on the brink at this moment are very likely to be pushed over.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a thing that concerns me more than almost anything else, because I think we could have a situation where the charts are saying, oh, look, we've hit the recovery, but the actual result in stores is a lot of people going out of business.
Yeah.
Because this has happened before. This is not, when we talk about cyclical, this is the cyclical part.
90s.
Is I lived through that, man. That was horrible. That was a lousy fucking time.
Right.
And a lot of stores got really badly hurt, and particularly the guys who are going all in the lenticulars, because you're talking about ordering hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comics to get those things. And I think you're more than that. You're talking about ordering hundreds of comics that that are negated because of the lenticulars.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the demand gets negated once the lenticular's there. Maybe. Who knows? I mean, who knows? See, here's the real problem. Here's the real problem with those legacy lenticulars, right? Is that they were not actually designed to be lenticular.
Yeah.
Right? They were homage covers, which is cool, right? They were originally presented to us as 2D covers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they looked neat. But if you take the homage and you take the original and you put them side by side, you will notice that they are not lined up.
Right.
They're not literal. Like if you look at the cover for the button, for example, right? Those Batman and Flash covers were clearly designed to be moving,
mm-hmm.
right? So the lenticularosity on it, if that's the word, is obvious.
I like it.
Basically works, you know, because I never find those lenticular effects to be great anyway. But like, you know, that first Batman and Flash one where it switches back and forth between their faces, like that one pretty much worked, you know.
Right.
They put layers in that were meant to 3D model it, but that I don't think that's happening with these Marvel ones. Because they're not designed that way, and they weren't planned to be lenticulars from the start. And so I'm really, really, really afraid for the guys who are going in. I mean, we're not doing the lenticulars, but for the guys who are going in on this, I'm terrified that those are going to look like shit on the stands, and people are going to be like, nah, I don't want those, you know. And so these are going to be stores who went 150, 200% on the regular book in order to get these lenticulars, and then boom, nobody wants them. You know, I mean, obviously it's not going to be that simplistic. It never is, but it's a real danger. It's a real danger this time. I'm sorry. That was a really. I went way off on a tangent there.
No. I'm all about it, but I mean, this is a stupid layman, I don't know how to run a comic book shop question, but
sure.
Like, so you're talking about shops that are on the verge, and my question is, I remember when I was doing this piece on variant covers, and G. Scott Tomlin from Arcane Comics, I think it's Arcane Comics in Seattle, he told me he basically a lot of times it falls upon the owner. It's like if you don't want to support variants and you don't want to encourage this, don't buy the variants, basically. And if to me, it's like if you're on the verge, why would you go so deep on those lenticulars? Are you looking at those kind of as like a great white hope that could possibly fix things for you, or is it just like you can't miss out because that's what your audience wants?
I think it's both of those fears for stores. I mean, I know that as much as I detested the hoops, and not just the hoops, but the basic math, right? Because Marvel lowered the discount on the lenticulars to straight up 50. I get 56 in my Marvels, so those 6 points of margin, I mean, are literally where the profit is, right? Like the profit's actually like in 2% or 3%. So, but even with going, this is stupid, this makes no sense, I wrestled for the better part of a week but I know that there are going to be customers who are going to want this and who are going to think less of us as a store because we don't have them, particularly at Outpost.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much at Experience. Experience tends to be the place the speculators come after they've gone to their speculator store, and then they come and see if we have any left because just that's the way that it works. So that fear of not being able to participate in the hot thing, I think is terrifying for a lot of stores, particularly stores, that have a lot of competition in the market. I mean, at this moment in time, I don't know what the stores in San Francisco are going to be doing, right? Like, there are 7 comic shops right now in the city, and I mean, I know that 2 of them won't have them because those are mine.
Right.
But the other 5, I mean, I literally don't know. And if any one of those 5 decided to go all in, it is potential that they could corner the market on those books. Now, the question is, right, does that lead to long-term sales, right? Or perhaps even more importantly, does it lead to long-term sales with the kinds of customers that are healthy for your business in the long term? And I would generally say no, it doesn't. But it's absolutely possible for one store to corner the market. It's also entirely possible that no store in San Francisco will have them because everybody's smart and everybody went, I can't do this. I don't think that that's going to be true, but it could be, you know. In which case, Dennis Barger, who has publicly stated on the Marvel Forum that he's he's buying hundreds of copies of these books and he's going to sell them to all of our customers, since we're all saying we're not going to carry them over the internet at 2 and 3 times cover price. So, there's a whole ecosystem in there.
Yeah.
Right? From the collectible point of view, and it's really difficult, just to know how not only stores are going to react, but how consumers are going to react to any of this. I tend to think that these books are desirable, which is why Marvel's doing them. But I also know that the risk and the downside, if this is not a hit, and I don't mean merely, hey, they all sold a little better. I mean, Legacy needs to be a monster hit mathematically for this to work, unless there's this whole speculator.
Right.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's the tricky thing, right? Is like, first off, I just want to note that when I read your column, your most recent column, I 100% thought that was Dennis Barger you were talking about. You didn't say him by name, but I thought it was. But the thing I was going to say is, like, you've written this several times lately. Like, things, to paraphrase, Marvel can sell a first issue, but can they sell a fourth? If Legacy, if the first issue blows up because of lenticulars and you're back to subs +1 or +2 at issue 4, it doesn't make a difference, right? I mean, like, it makes a brief difference. You've sold a bunch of lenticular covers. That's great. But it's like, if there's no sustainability, you're just back in the same muck you were in before, right?
Well, sure, right. But so here's the thing, right? So a lot of comic shops, and actually not a lot, just a lot of comic shops, a lot of small businesses in general are very, very tight on cash.
Right.
They're not extraordinarily profitable. And so that one-time cash injection might be the thing that keeps them going for another 4 or 5 or 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay. If it works. So I would never blame anybody for thinking, shit, I got to be a part of this.
Right.
Look, I mentioned Barger, who, I mean, I don't really care for the way that he does business, but there's Phil Boyle at Coliseum of Comics, who, if you can actually read what he wrote. If you go to my Building at Windmills and you scroll down into the link backs, the
okay, sure,
stories that link this, right? So there's one there from Phil, because he actually posts notes every single week about what he's doing on FOC, and he's kind of got a big little screed there about why he thinks that Marvel is doing this everything absolutely 100% wrong, and that he agrees with most of my column. But yet he's going all in because that's what his stores need. Mm-hmm. His stores, he runs 7 stores. They've got a lot of overhead, a lot of fixed costs. Marvel's been shitting the bed. If this is the thing that gets them back on the page, then he needs to participate and go all in at 100%. Mm-hmm. So, that's not, he's not doing it from a, Barger going, where he's twirling his mustache and going, ha ha ha, I'm going to make a ton of money off those idiots. I mean, here's a store who's doing it because they think that is the thing that they need to do. Unfortunately, I mean, it's phrased in a way like, I don't want to do this. This is not a thing I want to be doing. But they are, because that's what they see the viability for the next year's worth of comics is. Mm-hmm. To me, the problem is that none of the books are any different. They were pre-Legacy and post-Legacy. And that more than anything else is what makes this really, really dangerous. Mm-hmm. Like from a going all-in point of view, because despite the P.T. Barnum quote, I don't think that most readers are suckers, mm-hmm. And I think that someone, and I don't remember issue numbers, but I don't think that someone who decided that they didn't like the first 8 issues of America is suddenly going to buy issue number 9 because it has the word Legacy on it.
Right. Or it's a lenticular cover necessarily. Well, maybe that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there may well be people, in fact, I'm positive there are people who are thinking at least this moment that they're going to buy the whole swath of lenticulars as a collectible. It's fun. It'll be part of their collection, and that's fun, right? Collecting comics is fun.
Yeah.
But I don't think that those people are going to come back for the next issue if they're just coming in and buying 53 lenticulars as part of the program. I don't think that's how you breed readers, and I think that unless the content of the work changes, we're not going anywhere. It's not going to do anything, and we're back to where we were to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wasn't trying to be an asshole when I titled the column "Rearranging the Deck Chairs on the Titanic." I actually, like, probably for the first time in my life, I actually meant that simile, analogy,
Yeah, well,
whatever it is.
But the weird thing is like, it's not even rearranging. It's actually keeping the deck chairs on the same. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
yeah. No, actually, and I didn't use the rearranging. Actually, it was Marvel Comics and the deck chairs of the Titanic. And I was thinking it was like an Indiana Jones movie, you know?
Yeah. But I mean, I had a retailer email me before your column went up with basically all the same thoughts you had, and then hilariously he emailed me afterwards, and he was like, "I read Brian Hibbs' column. I just want to reiterate, I wrote that before that went up. I didn't steal that from him." But anyways,
but again, I mean, I think look, I think that comic book retailers in particular, we're and in the best possible sense of the word, we're like cockroaches. You can't kill us. I mean, you know, we've survived. Like, the way that we do business is insane to begin with, you know, and the fact that we continue to exist, if not thrive, you know, I mean, not a lot of people are thriving right now, but that we're surviving these things means that we're pretty smart generally about business. Now, again, you get into the two problems of not wanting to miss out of if this is hot. You don't want to be the one guy going, "Oh, I said no," right? You know, you don't want to be that guy.
right.
But there's also, you know, there's a certain number of people who the reason that they owned a comic shop is not just because they love comics, but particularly because they love Marvel comics, you know? And so anything that holds out hope that Marvel's going to finally right the ship, I mean, those guys are going to participate in. And you can't feel, I don't think that anyone's wrong if they go in. I mean, I think mathematically they're going to go to a really dangerous place, and I hope and pray that it works for them. And I'm not kidding when I say that. I really, 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 really hope this succeeds, not just for the individual stores, but for Marvel as well. I hope that they can turn this around. I would love nothing better than to write a Tilting at Windmills, and I sincerely mean this. I would love nothing better to write one that said, "I was entirely fucking wrong. I will eat crow on this, and I clearly don't know what I'm talking about Marvel Comics, and you should never listen to me." The thing is I know that I'm not going to write that column, you know?
Right.
This is not the thing that's going to change it. This is convergence.
Right. Yes.
You know, like if you look at sort of the cycle, they've got to do their new 52. I mean, hopefully they don't do it. They don't do the new 52 because that didn't work.
Hopefully they do a rebirth, not a new 52.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I was going to mention that it really does feel like the step before the step. It feels like a micro step, or like, or just kind of like this is going to help us get to May or June when we're going to do it, when we're going to do the big thing.
I mean, I think that they recognize that they're in trouble,
right,
and that they had to do something. But I don't think that they've yet recognized that the thing that they actually need to do is clean house. Mm-hmm. Right? And
do you mean line-wise?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, line-wise, potentially, you know, people in charge.
Right.
You know, because I think that there's a certain tone deafness. On the other hand, you know, DC didn't change anybody in charge, and the narrative has shifted for them. So maybe not. You know. I certainly don't want to call for anyone to be fired, but I do think, you know, for example, that Bendis wrote Tony Stark and nobody liked it, so that they did Riri and then nobody liked it. To think that Bendis writing Tony Stark again is suddenly magically going to make people like it strikes me as insane. you know. And so, you know, maybe put him on a different book or something, you know, something that he's more suited to, because I don't think he's suited for writing Iron Man. Nobody wants his Iron Man comics.
I do think it's really fascinating, like how DC made such a, or at least perceived shift. Like a lot of their business practices seem like they've listened, but they've kept the same people at the top. And you know, you would hope that Marvel would do the same, but it is kind of fascinating because a lot of the moves Marvel has made kind of seems like they heard what people said and then they said you're wrong back.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that was the thing that I think separated Rebirth from anything else. Is there was definitely a vibe of, yeah, we fucked up. We're sorry. We're sorry. We understand what we did wrong, and we're gonna try again.
Right.
You know, and people were willing, like, to be like that. Then people are willing to go, okay, maybe we can give him another chance. You know, so you know, and I think Marvel, but I think you're right. I have just been cocky, arrogant through this whole process, and when you see that in the process, and the work is exactly the same. You know? At most, they might have truncated a story. You know, they change order of things. It's not like America wasn't back anyway. You know, maybe he's coming back 6 months after that. You know, etc. And I think I always get the feeling from Marvel in any interaction with any of the UMT there that they're all like, they think that they know better, that they know best. They're Marvel Comics. We're the #1 publisher. We know it all. We know what's going on. It was kind of shocking actually when they held their retailer.
Oh, like the summit type thing that they had?
Yeah. That was shocking. That was like, oh my God, maybe they've actually learned. And you know, I unfortunately I think that they stacked. I don't know. Actually, I don't know what was said in those rooms, so I don't really know. But it feels to me like they stacked the room with people who tend to be Marvel fanboys.
Right.
You know.
And that's one of the tricky things is, like, if it just becomes an echo chamber, they don't learn anything. But I did want to ask about one thing we haven't talked about. You know, we talked about the lenticulars, we talked about kind of legacy and its potential and everything. But the last time we talked about how Image was leaving money on the table with their $9.99 first volume trades because they could be charging more. On the flip side of that, Marvel's charging $5.99 for legacy. How big of a deal do you think it is that Marvel's charging $5.99 for legacy instead of, I don't know. I mean, like, I think a big reason why Rebirth did as well as it did was because the special was $2.99 and people could jump in.
I think that is not 100% of it, but I think that's major impact on why Rebirth succeeded. No doubt about it. 80 pages for $2.99 got people going, I can drop that. It's not a problem. Yeah, no, I think Marvel is making a giant, enormous mistake by not making the book cheaper in this particular case. I don't necessarily think that they should reprice their whole line down to $2.99 because part of it's because I'm in San Francisco with $15 an hour minimum wage, and so relative to the rest of life, comics are really cheap from my point of view.
Right.
You know, to take a bus cross town is $2.50 now. So $2.99 for a comic doesn't really seem like a lot of money to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's totally different when you're someplace where the minimum wage is $8 or $9 or whatever. But yeah, comics look like preposterously cheap to me, given the nature of what they are. But having said that, I mean, I think that it's absolutely right that if Marvel really wants people in, then you know, doing loss leading pricing would have made a lot of sense. But I don't think that Marvel operates that way, and I think the vibe I've always gotten. And anytime I've ever brought it up, like, no one has ever pushed back on this. So I continue to believe that they've got a quarterly number that they've got to hit. And it has to be bigger than last year's. It has to. There's no If it's not, then people get fired.
Right.
So, that's that. If you look at every decision that they make through that lens, almost every decision that they make makes perfect sense. It's all short-term, quarter-by-quarter thinking.
Yeah. I mean, that was one thing. I mean, not that I'm gonna, defend their choices, but from a sheer business, from a sheer capitalistic standpoint, short-term gains, making revenue, things like that, what they're doing makes sense. But it's not. They're not sustainable practices. And that's the tricky part. Is like not everyone operates in the same way that like a Disney would theoretically. And not saying this is necessarily
Right.
Disney's like doing. I don't even know. I can't pretend to know the inner workings of Marvel, but it does make sense. And I don't know. I just when I saw $5.99, I knew that they wouldn't charge like. They wouldn't go serious loss leader and say we're going to charge $1 or something like that, or like do the quarter thing that Image was doing with Saga and Walking Dead and everything. But $2.99 felt like it was on the table, or even $3.99. $5.99 just seems like. I mean, Brian, obviously I'm talking to you for a comic book podcast. I'm probably an upper echelon hardcore comic fans. I love Jason Aaron, Esau Ribic. I honestly don't know if I would. I'm. It's gonna be a game time decision for whether or not I'm gonna buy that comic. Just because it's $5.99, I don't. I can buy something else. I can buy two something else's.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, it's an odd.
I have nothing to say to that other than I know.
Yeah.
and think about it on from the side of the table of I've got to guess how many of you are going to make what decision at game time.
Right.
And if I guess wrong, then that's game time for me. Game time over.
Right.
No, I mean I'm not going to be out of business if this fails because we're diversified enough. I think, but it will be for a number of stores, I think. And look, Generations, right, which just started last week, so far appears to be a giant flop.
Right.
I have, we for Generations Hulk at both stores, we sold the same number that we did of Totally Awesome Hulk number 17.
Ew.
Not 18 and 19, which is the crossover with Weapons of Mutant Destruction that soared the book up like 20% or something. But to the sort of the lowest level of Totally Awesome Hulk. Okay, I mean, I that's how I ordered it too, because I looked at it and I went, this looks like Locks, and I ordered it very tight. But I'm sure that there are stores out there that ordered heavier, that I don't know. I hope that those guys, I hope they sold them. I hope that they can make it work. I've just been doing this long enough. I can't be fake about, like, I can't go, oh, everybody has to buy this because it has to work, That's not why I sell comics. I sell comics because they're good.
Yeah. I have to ask, I know that the gates for a lot of the legacy issues have been dialed back, like, 200%, like ones that were like 250% are now 200%, woo, for like the lenticular covers. But, and I know also that from what I understand, like with legacy, you can order it the price down effectively. So you could theoretically charge $2.99, in your shop if you would so desire. Is that true? Are those things that are happening, or have they been dialing that back a bit?
So yeah, there's Hibbs on Legacy. They're 75%, up to a 75% discount, which means that you could theoretically drop the price down to $2 or $3.99 in your store and make the same amount of money that you would have made otherwise. The problem becomes the lenticular there, because the lenticular doesn't count towards that.
Mm-hmm.
And so so you basically have to, because every copy of the lenticular that you sell in theory means that's one less copy of the regular you're going to sell.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the regular has the fold-out triple gatefold cover or whatever. So it's really, really hard to judge which of those two products is the right one to order, and in what kind of quantity. So you could theoretically sell Legacy, the regular version, for $3.99, still make the same amount of money, and then have the lenticular as the higher end premium product. And I know some stores are doing that. I haven't finalized my decision yet because we don't have to do that until this week.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make that decision at the last possible moment, I'm sure.
Well, and that makes us. I just want to say that makes a certain amount of sense, given the fact that DC themselves had the $2.99 version of Rebirth, and I think I don't remember if it was 2 weeks later, if it was a month later, they had that hardcover that was like $5.99, and
yep.
so they had like a variation if you were like a collector or a hardcore fan or something like that. I mean that kind of stuff is fine.
The thing is that widely, most retailers are not gonna inherently do the math and figure out what that's selling at a cheaper price. And what are you potentially costing yourself? Also, it's a hard thing to put on the retailer. That's a publisher level decision, as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And for them not to have made that decision is frankly cowardly, in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now for Legacy, they have not yet given us any deep discount numbers to match the gates. One of the big fucking things that Marvel does that I hate about them more than anything else ever is that they don't tell us all the terms up front.
Mm.
They change the terms as we get to FOC. And they'll change discounts, they'll change incentives, which I suppose is what the function of incentive is, right, to get you to order more copies. But it means that we're sitting here doing math 2 and 3 and 4 times sometimes for these books, as they change the terms and they change the rules and they change the shape and the notion of what it is.
It almost seems like they're asking you to put a placeholder number in to start with, and then actually make your real orders during FOC.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's crazy.
Pretty much, because particularly with the lenticulars, they're saying if you don't order them by initial order, all orders by initial order are. They never used the word guaranteed, but will fill. I mean, David Gabriel said that they should fill.
Right.
But any order after that may or may not fill.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of rude, if you ask me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, but that just doesn't seem that's if you change anything after the initials are locked, you change anything that changes the math, then you just fucked everybody.
Right. I mean,
you're asking people to make decisions with incomplete information.
I presume they wouldn't change the terms in a negative way, like make them more stringent or more expensive.
No, usually they make them better, but again, these things can drastically change what the calculus is. The calculus on these lenticular covers right now for the legacy books, not for legacy number 1. God, it's so confusing.
I know.
Motherfuckers. But for the 50, well, there's only 29 in month 1. There will be 53 altogether, they say.
Mm-hmm.
So for those 29 books, right now we have to make a decision of whether we want these lenticular covers at a for us a 6% lower discount, or. And in order to do that, we have to order X number of copies of the regular covers. So right now, based upon the information that I have, I'm saying I'm not going to be ordering any of those because the math doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So if they fundamentally change the math, if they go, if you make those gates, you're getting an extra 15% discount on those legacy books, which fundamentally changes the math.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the lenticular deal stays the same, maybe it does make sense to have bought in on that at that point then,
mm-hmm.
right? But if they're telling me that you may not get the lenticular because you didn't order it in time, you see what I mean? Like, it's this whole chain of decisions that you have to make that we can't make the decision in the right way. If they were to change that, even if it's for the better, David, right? That doesn't actually help because of the way they're doing the lenticular.
Yeah, I mean, the fascinating thing is like, if in theory they made it so that orders weren't set until FOC and they changed the terms on you, you would order more and you would get more lenticulars, but because of the nature of it, you can't, which is self-hamstringing. Didn't you I mean, not you, but I mean
and look, if they had made these open to buy, if they had just made it, It's a regular book. Just buy whatever you want to. We would be having a very different conversation right now. We would be talking about how it's really exciting that Marvel has figured things out and is trying to be pro-retailer, and I would have been a very, very, very different Tilting at Windmills, okay? I would have been telling you how many, I'm trying to decide between ordering 25 of each of these books and 50, and most of them only sell one or two, so this is a big gain.
Right.
That's the conversation we'd be having.
The button was open order, wasn't it?
Yep.
So
sure was.
Is Metal open order?
Metal's open order. Yeah, DC has been open order on everything for at least since Rebirth, but I think before that. Yeah, no, because all their stunt month covers were all open to order. That's when they started doing open to order, and then they realized, oh my God, open to order makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of fascinating. It's like I don't know. I mean, like if they don't listen, if Marvel doesn't listen to its readers, you would think to a certain degree that they would. I mean, they're never gonna say that like they're gonna copy DC, but like kind of emulating some of their moves kind of seemed like a smart thing, especially given like Button was an enormous success. It did great for a lot of people, and it's just kind of fascinating. But I want to diverge big time to close out. I want to ask a few questions about kind of the volume of books that are being released these days, and I wanted to frame it around Rich Tommaso. Rich Tommaso is a cartoonist who makes comics like Spy Seal and She-Wolf and Dark Corridor. He's a very good cartoonist, but he had a post recently about Spy Seal sales and his disappointment with that. And one of the things there was all kinds of comments in that thread. I saw you comment in it, all kinds of different things. I'm curious though. One thing I'm interested in is whether or not, like, I personally think that a book like Spy Seal has a tougher time to succeed when there's 500 books that retailers could be ordering. Do you think that the market is currently flooded, and do you think that it has a negative impact on books that are smaller that might have a tougher time building an audience?
Yes.
Yep. That is a boring answer, Brian. That's a boring answer.
Well, it was a leading question, David. No, but I mean, look, completely, 100%, absolutely. There is no doubt about it that we are in a golden age of comics right now.
Yeah. And
there is more good material being published today than there ever has been, ever in the history of comics, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not just talking about a graphic novel here and there. Even the monthly books, there is more good, stuff that's like B+ and above, right? But nobody can buy it all. Nobody can read it all. It's just not possible. And so everything's competing against everything else. And we're, we have 5 different universities which are graduating 10 or more cartoonists every single year.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I just, when I think about the sheer volume of people trying to make a living off comics, trying to get in, and the market is growing in a way, but it's not growing for individual books. It's widening.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Which makes it really dangerous, both for a creator trying to make revenue off of the material, as well as for the retailer trying to assess how to stock that material.
Mm-hmm.
And it's there are so many comics out there that are so good that they don't all sell as a result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, look at to make an analogy, I mean, TV has had a lot of shows that people love canceled, but I mean, part of the problem is you have hundreds of TV stations, you have Hulu, you have Netflix, you have all of these ones have original programming. Even YouTube has original programming, and you're widening the audience, or widening the total offerings, and there's still only the same amount of people available to watch. So is the value still there? It can be tough. Like like you said earlier, the calculus gets difficult, and with comics,
sure. And then the other problem is that of course everything is available forever.
Right.
at all times, right? I mean, which is actually factually not true because there are plenty of things you can't watch right now on any of those streaming services.
Right.
But it's close enough to true that you're not, and the same thing is true with comics because of the boom of graphic novels. So when you put out your comic book, you're not just competing now against your contemporary peers. You're now competing against every comic that has ever come out and stood the test of time ever.
Right. Man.
You know?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
It is hard to stand out on the racks. It is hard, and when you start understanding some of the basic math, then you can start understanding why publishers do the things they do, and you also understand how the more things they publish makes the problem worse, because it's not as though they're getting more marketing and publicity people, because even if they did get more people, there's still the same amount of bandwidth at a comics news site. I mean, even try to just stay current on something like The Beat sometimes drives me insane.
Oh, yeah.
Stories scroll off like in a day. Let alone a CBR or a Bleeding Cool, which has like a whole range of things that are not just comics, all of pop culture. And so if most comics don't sell very well, so there's really not a point in trying to do a lot of publicity for most of them, because most of what you're going to do is not going to be able to move the needle in any way, shape, or form. So like if Image is publishing 60 different comics, right, and they've got 3 people, maybe 4 people making the marketing and publicity stuff, that's still 15 books a person if you just divide it like kind of equally. I mean, you can't promote 15 books equally. Trust me, as a retailer, I tell you, you cannot promote 15 books equally. That is not how life works at all. When you're a salesperson, if you're really, 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 really good at your job, maybe your upper limit of things that you can keep in your head at one time that you're giving equal pushes to is like 8 to 10. I don't even think it's that much. I really think it's like 4 to 6. And so that means that, the more you publish, the harder it is for anything to get the oxygen or the sunlight that it needs to grow. And I feel really rough for guys like Rich, who, it's just, this is not a book that hit for whatever reason. I mean, I think part of the reason, right, is that it was a follow-up, to a hard-boiled crime story, and then, a werewolf horror story, and now he's doing Tintin. And I think the audience and the retailers went, huh?
Right.
I'm not sure who to order this for. I'm going to order Tight. This may be the best thing that he's ever done, right? But it's such a tonal shift from his body of work that it's really, really hard to go, okay, I'm going to go crazy nuts on ordering this. Plus anthropomorphics. A lot of people don't like anthropomorphics.
It's not like a Brubaker and Phillips who what they're going to be, what they're going to be doing.
Right. Yeah. And even when you don't, even if they change it a little bit, they're not changing it so much that if they go from doing a horror comic to doing a crime comic, that's not as much of a tonal shift.
Right. It still feels like them.
Yeah, it still feels like them, exactly.
I'd never thought about, so let's say you're launching an all-ages book. Like, a book I really like that's coming up is Scales and Scoundrels. It's from Sebastian Gerner and Galad, and it's an Image book, and I swear to God it keeps coming up on my podcast over and over. But I had never thought that, let's say when the trade comes out, that it would be competing with like Raina Telgemeier and like Kazu Kibuishi and like El Defo and things like that. Like, not saying that that's like the direct competition, but I mean, I guess I'd never thought of like those evergreen books, those ones that just keep selling and keep selling and keep selling as competition for that, even though it's absolutely illogical. It's bizarre.
Well, and even more so when you're in the kids space, I think it's the impact of that is we haven't actually seen it yet because this kids explosion of comics is still relatively new. But what we're going to see, I think, is like 6 years from now, let's say, I'm just picking a number, when the kids who were 8 and started reading Raina and they grew up and then they hit 14, and then at 14 you basically stop reading comics for a little while.
Right.
This is kind of historically the thing that happens, right? You discover boys or girls or cars or just school gets much harder. and you walk away from comics as being kid stuff. Typically until you're back in college or just post college. I mean, that's historically always been, even before the direct market, was always the thing that happened, right? I mean, you read histories of DC Comics in the 50s, and they were talking about how the audience turns over every 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, you've got this wave of kids who have been reading, relatively recently in comics, and they're voracious for what else is new, and so that's sustaining a lot of books. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but you're going to hit a point where those kids age out, and then the new kids coming in are going to start. They have a much wider pool to choose from. Is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Did I parse
No,
that
100%. No, 100%. I mean, they're going from picking from like the current graphics line to picking from graphics and First Second and whoever
Yep.
paper cuts and whomever
Yep.
else. And so
Yep, and whatever DC is going to do, and blah 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 blah. And the more people who get in, the less piece of the pie there will be for everyone. I mean, obviously, someone like Raina, because she's got such good name recognition, is probably going to be 100% fine on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
When best-selling authors tend to stay best-selling authors as long as they keep producing new work on a somewhat regular basis, because it just becomes self-reinforcing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Even if their new work isn't as good as their old work, or it is, who knows? It just becomes self-reinforcing in the eyes of booksellers in the way that they sell books. But I think that there will be fewer and fewer opportunities for people coming in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. If you're fantastic, of course you can always stand out. But if you're mediocre, and if you have an okay kids book idea and your craft is fine, I think in a couple of years you're probably not going to be making back your advance from those big publishers. You're probably not going to be able to sell enough copies if you're serializing to make a going concern of it, because this is just sort of the nature of how this business works.
Mm-hmm.
We'll hit a wall of the ability for people to spring in. And again, when we get back to the 5 colleges or whatever that are graduating all these kids, and most of them are being told from a career point of view to get into YA and to do kids books, but to do graphic novels. That's the story, right? That's the official story. All growth is in doing kids graphic novels, right? That's
right.
Even someone as sane and rational as Heidi. That's the presentation. And it's not just that, but it's I told you so,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you've got a bunch of people now focusing on that. And so for a year or 2 years or maybe 3 or 4 years, they're going to disappear into that little hole. And the market may have changed by the time they come out with their book,
Mm-hmm.
If you're exceptional, there's always room for you. But if you're a journeyman, and I don't use that in a pejorative sense at all. The market is not particularly forgiving to you, unfortunately.
Well, it's you wrote a piece about it. I mean, like you had the Tilting at Windmills about the long tail of graphic novels and how, like,
Yep.
sure, there's a Watchmen out there. Like, there's the books that sell like Raina numbers, but then, the vast majority of the books sell beneath that top 100, 750 list. That means less than 900 books, which means less than 75 a month, which is, that's tough. That's tough for an entire nation, and it's tough for cartoonists and creators out there. And it is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's on all levels, we're overproducing art, and every time we do that, it makes it harder for
The next guy.
And I don't know that there's a solution to that. I mean, I don't know that there should be a solution necessarily, because the market eventually takes care of everything, right?
Right.
No one's owed a career in art, as cold as that may sound. I mean, but it's true. But it's hard when you get someone like Rich who's genuinely, he's got a solid talent, and he's doing sincere work, and it's clear that he's doing something that he likes, and and he may not hit the numbers that he needs to do to keep doing it. He may have to go get a job. I think he said it at a pizza place. Like, man, that would suck, man.
Yeah.
Like if there's a thing that you've been doing for 20 years and all of a sudden you're told you can't do it anymore,
Mm-hmm.
that sucks. But the history of comics has always been filled with that, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like, always.
I mean,
has been filled with that.
yeah. I mean, I hesitate to use the term meritocracy, but it's like what you said earlier. It's like the market kind of dictates. Like, it's kind of going to make its choices for you, whether or not you wanted to or not. I mean, I do think there are interesting wrinkles today because there are people who succeed really heavily using, Kickstarter and Patreon and things of that sort. But I mean, it's even those people. I mean, as a person who runs a Patreon, I can tell you that it's tough to gain patrons. It's not an easy road,
Is.
and and I feel like I'm semi-successful at what I do, and I'm still like,
Yeah.
I mean,
But even like think about like a guy like, here's a great example, I think, Neil Adams, right? There was a time where Neil Adams was hotter than shit,
mm-hmm.
right? He was. If we had been told 15 years ago, Neil Adams is coming out with a brand new Dead Man comic that's
Mm-hmm.
going to finally answer all the questions from his run, like, we'd be like, oh my God, that's going to be a monster success, right? It's going to be huge.
Right.
And like, they just announced that comic, and I'm thinking, yeah, I might order 5 copies. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll order 10 copies.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. Nobody cares. And here's a guy who was huge back in the day. We've seen that with Perez and Byrne, right? Those
Mm-hmm.
guys were enormous, and then they couldn't get arrested.
Right.
Right? Times changed, tastes changed, the audience changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's true for John Byrne and George Perez and Neil Adams, then how much more true is it for Rich Tommaso, who was never huge to begin with?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no.
And that whole class of hard-working, excellent craftsmen, but not something that set the market on fire,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even Jim Lee, right? Jim Lee, president of DC Comics. Nobody cares about his artwork anymore. No one does. DC keeps pushing it, but nobody cares about Jim Lee anymore.
That's why I'm really curious as to how the dark matter stuff is going to work, because I don't know. I mean, like, I like Romita and I like Jim Lee and I like, they're great. They're like some of my favorite, artists from my childhood and everything. But I don't know how much those unknown properties would have like some sort of tie to the DC universe with artists that are big names are going to sell, and whether or not I'm even interested in really reading them, because I still don't really know that much about them. Like, it's a fascinating line for that reason.
Yeah, no, and I mean, my sense at this point, again, we haven't seen a single solicitation.
Right.
We don't know anything other than blurbs here and there, but I think it's DOA already. I mean, just if my retailer sense went, nope, that one's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't looking for a line of comics. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And anybody who tries to convince you that people are looking for a line of comics doesn't know what they're talking about. People are looking for comics. People are looking for great comics. They want more. People want to read a new thing that excites them. But they definitely don't want, this is one of 6 or 8 things, and they're of a piece. And that's not how people buy comics. It's not. It maybe is how you market comics, maybe, but it's not how people buy comics, not how consumers do it,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I think it's easy to take the wrong lessons from the success of a Rebirth, right?
Right.
Where people did buy in across the line because they were returnable.
Right.
And then to go, okay, if we do that again, it'll work. Well, yeah, the reason it worked was because it was Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and Green Lantern and Flash.
Mm-hmm.
If it's no name and no name and no name and, oh, someone connected to Mr. Terrific,
Mm-hmm.
which is may as well be no name. It's not gonna work. And I don't know, like, just looking at what they've shown us so far, which again is not very much, but they just sound like pitches that Image rejected. Or something,
Yeah. 100%.
Like, do you remember when Romita Jr. did that book at Image? I can't remember what it was called.
I can't remember the last thing he did that was creator on that wasn't Kick-Ass.
Yeah, no, it was before Kick-Ass.
Okay.
And it was his own book. And nobody wanted it because it wasn't anything. There's a feeling I think that some people get that if you hit a certain level of talent, then you can just do anything. and people will just buy it. But I've never found that. Well, I've seldom found that to be true, and the people that it's true for are people who are mavericks and are operating on a different plane than the rest of us,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can sell any Alan Moore comic at X number of copies because he's Alan Moore. If Frank Miller started doing comics again, like actually drawing them, I suspect that there is a level that, you know, is higher than I might otherwise think it is, just because it's Frank Miller drawing comics again.
Mm-hmm.
But those kinds of guys are few and far between.
Yeah.
And just because you made your bones doing superhero comics at the big two doesn't mean that anyone's going to follow you anywhere else. And in that thread, there was a lot of people saying, oh yeah, no, the math is go and make your bones at Marvel and DC, and then you do Image, and then you do much better. And I think that is when you look at the data set that they're analyzing, is not an insupportable conclusion, but it's not a one-to-one relationship the way that the people in that thread were trying to portray it. Yes, it is correct that the top 10 books, you know, are and it's guys like Remender and Fraction, you
Hickman.
know, who did have careers there, but you forget about all the other Image books that those guys did that didn't hit in the way that Sex Criminals or Seven to Eternity did.
Mm-hmm.
Comics are not you can't make a calculation, because there's art involved.
Right.
It's not a science, it's an art.
Mm-hmm.
I see this over and over and over again, and people really don't understand what I'm saying most of the time. When you're trying to figure out what's going to sell, it's an alchemical thing that changes from project to project, and even sometimes issue to issue, that you can't predict, and you can't go, oh well, if I do work at Marvel and build my name, then I can come over here and do whatever I want to. I mean, sure, that is a path, but only if the thing that you bring to Image or to self-publishing or whatever is something that's a great piece of work.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a mediocre piece of work, the market's not going to fucking care.
Right.
That's just how it works. I don't even mean if it's a mediocre piece of work. I mean if it's a thing that the market doesn't know that it wants, right? Like anthropomorphic comics that look like Tintin, I think that we could all say historically are not the kind of thing that the market supports. Not merely the direct market, I mean markets in general.
Right.
Those are not, they don't sell in the bookstores, it doesn't sell in the comic shops. I get why you want to do it, and it may be the best work of your career, but that's not how the market's going to judge it up front.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if he had been writing Avengers for 2 years at Marvel, I still think the market would have looked at that and gone, yeah, I don't know if that's what it's for us, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, Brian, that thank you so much for everything. That is actually all I have. I hate to cut you off, but
No, all good.
But I really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
It's my absolute pleasure, David.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with retailer Brian Hibbs. You can find Brian in his shops, Comics Experience and Comics Experience Outpost in San Francisco, as well as in his regular column at The Beat, Tilting at Windmills. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Michael Perlman, Phil Knoll, Ian Maxfield, Benjamin Shipper, Barry Straw, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Dan Lee, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Brian Dickerson, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mayle, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Johan Borander, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Matt Pataglia, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.